Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
G'day, welcome to the Australian Property Podcast, our weekly 2 cent segment. I'm Pete Wargent from Alan Wargent Property Buyers, and you'll note if you're watching on the video stream, a change of guests this week or presenters. Chris is off sunning himself in Bali this week. So while he's by the pool, I've got a super sub in. This week, I've got Guy Smith, Senior Buyers Agent with us at Alan Wargent in Brisbane. Guy, good to see you.
Yeah, good to be with you, Pete.
So tell me about the Origin last night. So obviously there would have been some celebration on Caxton Street. I think the game is almost over after 7 minutes with the sending off. So good news for the Maroons, I suppose.
Yeah, obviously we're pretty happy here in Queensland with the win, but there's a bit of a shame for Reece Walsh to be taken out after 10 minutes. Kind of ruined the spectacle a little bit, but still a good game actually. I think it was still entertaining game, but I always like a close one. The closer ones are always the best. Personally.
Yeah, I'm the same really, because I guess like technically I lived in Sydney before I lived in Queensland. So, but as you said, it's always better when you get a contest and somebody gets sent off after 7 minutes. So I always think it's when you've got 80,000 people turn out, you want to see the full game. But then when I saw the replay, I was like, oh, actually that wasn't great. So anyway, let's talk about property. So Guy, for people not familiar, just want to give us a quick background about yourself. Obviously, this is a bit of a Queensland-focused episode this week. So I think over, 20 years in the industry, you've been a real estate agent. You had 10 years or so as a valuer, and past 5 years or so, I think now you've been a buyer's agent, senior buyer's agent with us, and obviously a bit of a specialist in Brisbane. Is that kind of a rough potted history of your career and background?
Yeah, that was pretty good. I was born and bred in New Zealand. I grew up on a sheep and cattle farm in a place called Gisborne on the east coast of the North Island, and moved over to Sydney 2004, so about 20 years ago. Just planning on staying in Australia for a year or two with a couple of mates, and then 20 years later, I'm still here. So. Got into valuation after a couple of years in sales on the Sunshine Coast, Malulabar actually, for Ray White Malulabar, and then valued for a bit over 10 years, about 12 years, and then early 2020 I started as a buyer's agent just before COVID. So I thought I might have to go back to being a valuer for a while there when COVID hit. It's about 6 weeks into the job, I think, but ended up picking up a few really good buys at that time. So for those clients that hung in there at that time, now been doing it for almost 5 years and purchased around 100 properties now for clients. So.
It's interesting because you've been on, I suppose, all sides of the fence. You've been selling properties and then valuing them, and then for the past 5 years on the buy side. So I guess you've seen all angles. And I think that was really the reason I wanted to get you on today. It's a bit of a Queensland-focused episode because, it's all the rage in the news at the moment, what's going on in Brisbane, but also Sunshine Coast. You mentioned Malulabar, Gold Coast has been booming. So I thought, who better to give us an insight into what's happening particularly in Brisbane, but also parts of Queensland, as to what's really going on at the coalface, because it's been pretty manic. As you said, we've had really unusual 4 or 5 years. So it's, I guess Queensland was less impacted by the lockdowns initially, and then we did get quite bad lockdowns, and then there was the reopening and the stimulus boom, and now we've got a real shortage of housing, and it's it's certainly been a baptism of fire on the buy side for you. The way we usually run these 2 cents segments for those of you who listen each week is we run through the top 3 news stories of the week. So we'll run through those and we'll take a look at them, but with Guy's input from a Queensland standpoint. So let's take a look at this first story of the week. So CoreLogic has been out with Tim Lawless, and this is one of the news stories that's been doing the rounds. So Brisbane is now the second most expensive city in Australia. So I remember years ago, I used to do analysis for various media outlets, and one of the things we used to look at was the ratio of Sydney house prices to Brisbane, and at one stage it was about 2.2 times as expensive. And to me, that was a no-brainer, right? You've got to start buying in Brisbane because people in Sydney are going to start seeing the value when the price of a house is only half as much. But obviously that ratio has been closing over the past 4 or 5 years. So I'll just shout out a couple of stats from CoreLogic, Guy, and then we can have a look at what's actually happening. So with Brisbane housing values consistently posting solid capital gains, while Canberra and the ACT has been pretty stable, Brisbane's now overtaken Canberra as having the second highest median dwelling value across the capitals for the first time for Brisbane since 1997. And in January, CoreLogic also highlighted that Brisbane dwelling values overtook Melbourne's median, but that was partly a compositional effect because obviously there's a lot more units in Melbourne than there would be in Brisbane, and also quite a lot of relatively cheap units in Melbourne. But it now looks like house values in Brisbane are also overtaking Melbourne as it approaches $1 million median price. So quite a bit to digest there, Guy. But what I guess obviously you're saying this firsthand as a buyer's agent. I know it's been a hectic year or two for you, but what are you seeing in the market right now? Is the market still firing, or are people getting a bit more apprehensive about rising prices and low stock? What are you finding?
No, it's absolutely still firing. I think the rates of growth are still very much boom time rates of growth, both in the housing and the unit townhouse market. We are seeing more strength in the unit and townhouse and villa market. It's definitely harder to buy in that space than it is to buy a house, I would say. It's not unusual for us to be coming up against 15 offers on a good owner-occupier style unit or townhouse in a smaller complex in a well located. Whereas with a house, depending on the price bracket again, but you're probably more likely up against four or five offers.
Well, that's pretty interesting, right? Because for Brisbane, a bit like in Melbourne, actually, I guess for about 10 to maybe 12 years, there was no price growth at all. If you looked at the asking price index, and then suddenly, for various reasons, I guess affordability being one, and then very low stock levels, suddenly we're getting loads of competition for units. I think obviously with interest rates going up, that's pushed quite a few of the buyers down, and also I think just the relative value. I think it was just very cheap comparatively to buy a unit in Brisbane until quite recently. When you say those sort of attractive owner-occupier units in the boutique blocks and so on that the owner-occupiers and home buyers really like to look for, what kind of suburbs are you talking about? I remember New Farm being very popular when I lived there some years back, but I guess that's now spreading out to some of the other blue chip areas as well.
Yeah, absolutely. New Farm, Bulimba, areas like Ascot, Hamilton. It's really pushing out further now, though, because prices have risen so quickly for the good quality in the good quality areas. Paddington as well. Saw one the other day in Paddington. I think it'd been purchased just about 2 years ago. I think in the 600s. I think in the low 600s. It's just resold for about 900. I think they've done a few small cosmetic upgrades potentially, but just seen very strong growth, particularly if there's quite a big difference between those larger units and the smaller ones, though. So still need to be quite specific in what you're choosing. And it's not everything that's going up that exponentially, but those larger ones, small complexes, older style ones, if it's got something a little bit different, like a nice outlook or a courtyard or something like that, they're always super popular.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I definitely noticed during the last construction boom around Newstead and suburbs like that, a lot of the new apartments were tiny. Even the two-bedders were very, very small. And they were clearly, a lot of it was built very much with a sort of a cheaper budget in mind, but they're very much targeted towards investors and not so much towards the home buyers. But the stuff that seems to have been popular, at least from where I'm sitting, seems to be, as you said, it's that kind of established boutique unit block that feels a little bit more like a home rather than a tower block. Yeah. And if you get something with a good balcony, good aspect, reasonably low strata fees, and yeah, in some of those more sort of sought after blue chip areas, they've been phenomenally popular, I guess, just in the last 2 or 3 years now. And yeah, increasingly seeing some significant price growth, even in the past quarter. I think asking prices for units up 6.5% or so. So that's rapid levels of demand there. Now, I think just from the inquiries we've been getting over recent times, it seems to me there's an awful lot of buyers around similar price points at the moment, 700, 800, 900. Is that where most of the competition seems to be? And following on from that, is there less competition at higher price points?
Yeah, I think absolutely between 600 and $1 million for good units is a huge amount of competition. It's probably strongest even below 700. I think there's still probably quite a few first home buyers that are they can only spend 700 max to qualify for the first home buyer guarantee scheme, the 5% deposit. So we are finding there's anything that's below 600, there's still huge interest in those. Bought one recently and there was 21 offers on that property in Chermside in North Brisbane. But still really strong interest between 700 and $1 million as well. So I think once you go over $1 million, it's probably not quite as many buyers in that price bracket, but the high-end units also going very well for a lot of downsizes.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think you mentioned there the first home buyer guarantee. I think we've seen parents helping their kids into the housing market because the rental market's been so tight, and also investors from interstate. And there's a lot of buyers sort of concentrating around those lower price points. But what do you do when you get a property you really like for a home buyer and there's maybe 10 or 15 other buyers? What are the things you can do from a negotiation perspective to try and give yourself the best chance? Have you got any sort of tips or tricks for us? Because it's a tough buying environment at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely got to think outside the box a bit when you're up against so much competition. But the first thing is to speak to a good broker and just make sure you're really well organised with your finance and maybe got some buffers in place. Make sure you go with a lender that's got quite a fast turnaround time as well. I think that's really actually quite important. You can always refinance at a later date. Obviously, I probably can't give a specific advice in that regard, but in this environment, you can't be putting down like 14 days of finance. Can't be subject to finance for 14 days. Ideally, making the conditions as short as possible. If you can make an offer not subject to finance, that is a real benefit to help your offer stand out at the moment, because chances are you're going to be up against other offers that there are some other what we call cash offers, which means they're not subject to finance. Basically the same as buying at auction, where you can't have a finance condition. We always speak to the client's brokers, make sure they're comfortable with that, make sure the client is comfortable with that before we would do that. But we always look at the worst case scenario and make sure they're going to be okay in the worst case scenario. I also do a very thorough valuation on the property, and I'm always very confident in the valuation on the property since I'm a valuer myself. I'll make sure there's lots of good comparisons that a valuer can use for the property. Also, I ask a lot of questions to the sales agent and find out the situation of the sellers, find out if there's any ways we can make our offer more attractive to them, whether it's a short settlement or a long settlement, or sometimes we have investor buyers and it's an owner-occupier. They haven't bought elsewhere yet, and it might be really attractive for them to have a rent back offered to them, so to be able to stay in their property after settlement while they find another place to buy. So we will often offer that if it's an investor client we have, and that can really help set out. Sometimes we'll secure the property for lower than the top offer because we've got conditions like that, which are more important to the seller than an extra, say, $5,000. So it's really, once you know the situation of the sellers, then you've got to try and look at ways that are going to make your offer attractive to them and stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, we get so many people come to us and they say, look, I've been trying to buy this property. I really liked it. And then the agent didn't tell me what was going on. They sold it to somebody else, or, they gave me some misinformation or whatever. And it's, a lot of this stuff, it really just comes with experience and also dealing with agents more regularly, I guess. But it's certainly a very frustrating environment out there for buyers at the moment, because certainly for the more sort of sought after or good quality stock, there's loads of interest and just not that much quality stock being listed at this time of year. We're into June now, not traditionally a time when you get much stock on the market. So it's pretty difficult. Let's have a look at this second news story of the week. So from ABC News, it was actually just basically a house price breakdown by state, territory, capital city and region. So just wanted to take a look at some of the interesting trends. I was interested to know, you mentioned your previously Sunshine Coast. Well, the regions now, it seems like all around the country, regional prices are rising. And I think if you'd have asked me 18 months ago, given the cash rate trajectory and the way mortgage rates have gone, I would have said there's no way that would happen. And yet here we are. And I guess that just speaks to the rising cost of construction and just a massive shortage of supply. Now, obviously, we've mentioned Brisbane is pretty strong, but also it looks like the regions around Brisbane, so the Ipswich and Logan markets and Moreton Bay, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, there's price growth there as well. What are you seeing in Brisbane at the moment? Because as buyers agents, a lot of the inquiry we get is firstly investors, and secondly, a lot of people from interstate, particularly Sydney and Melbourne, because they're looking to buy as an interstate investor, maybe a cheaper market. But are we getting more home buyers using buyers agents than normal at the moment, do you think?
I think we probably are getting a few more than normal, I would say. We're probably doing about 50-50 at the moment, investors and owner-occupiers. And it's probably historically, we get a few more investors because they are often interstate and need someone who knows the local market in Brisbane well, and they can't get here physically often. But we are seeing a lot of owner-occupiers now just because it's so difficult to buy, so much competition out there. So buyers are getting frustrated, like you said, through missing out, using up all their weekends and a lot of time and stress and frustration. So we are getting more owner-occupiers because of that really strong competition.
Yeah, it does make sense. Sorry, you go.
Yeah, sorry. And when they don't know prices really well, they're often not confident pushing to the level that they need to buy a really good property often. And sometimes they just need that guidance and talking them through the whole process to make them comfortable with making decisions.
Yeah, we've had a few first-time buyers in recent times, and it's a tough time to be a first-time purchaser in this kind of a market. I did read in the NAB survey, there's not as many foreign buyers around at the moment. I think that's partly because of China's economic and real estate downturn. I think when China's booming, I think people are trying to get capital out of China, a bit of capital flight, and Australia is an easy place to park those funds. But that doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. But I think that could also be a bit of a handbrake on supply, because a lot of new apartments used to be bought by investors from Asia, particularly mainland China, and that's not really happening so much. Guy, one of the things that people ask me all the time about is off-market deals, off-market databases, sourcing off-market properties. Now, we get, obviously, as buyers agents, we get off-market deals all the time. But are we getting, is the quality of off-market deals good, bad, or indifferent at the moment? I don't have a strong sense of it. What do you see?
Yeah, they're mixed, I think. I think most of them are probably pre-market rather than genuine off-market.
So that means basically a property that's going to be listed, but it's not been,
yes.
It hasn't been prepared or photographed and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. So we're constantly sending out briefs to agent contacts for what we're looking for clients, often on the phone. So we're always just asking about what they've got coming up soon, and can we get access to that before it comes online, and try and get a deal together before everyone gets access and it goes online might save the sellers a bit of money on marketing, and obviously if we can reduce the competition for our clients, it's going to be really beneficial. But yeah, in terms of the quality, they can be mixed. Some of them we'd reject pretty quickly. So the quality still needs to be there for us to consider it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, I think sometimes people think there's a bit of a secret sauce or something to pre-market or off-market deals, but just because a property is off-market doesn't mean it's any good. Sometimes people will try and sell stuff off-market which has got seriously compromised, foundations or something in a flood zone. This is the sort of thing you see in a hot market, because in a really hot market, even the rubbish can sell. And maybe that's the time when people might try and sell that way, because people aren't doing full due diligence. So, yeah, I think, of course, we look at pre-market and off-market deals all the time. But as you said, you've got to still look at it with a critical eye, because it could be good or it might not be any good. Guy, are people asking much about things like the Olympics in 2032? I go down to the Gabba fairly often for the AFL, every second week, really. And it's interesting to see the Cross River Rails fully underway, and there's a lot of investment going in. But it seems to me with the Olympics that it's going to be a lot of last minute decision making, and cost overruns are probably going to be the order of the day. But is the Olympics something that people ask about in terms of hotspot suburbs and things like that, or is it not really a factor?
I think it's just giving investors a lot of confidence in Brisbane for the medium term or longer term as well, potentially. So I don't think most buyers that come to us aren't after specific suburbs around Olympic precincts, but in saying that, I guess the government still seem to be deciding on a lot of where things are still going for the Olympics anyway, in terms of new stadiums and things like that. So there's still a fair bit of uncertainty in that regard. But I think the biggest thing is it's just giving people confidence in Brisbane, and knowing that there's a lot of new infrastructure going in. There's the Queen's Wharf development, a new big casino and resort, and which is really state of the art. There's the Cross River Rail that you mentioned. There's Waterfront Brisbane, which is a redevelopment of the Eagle Street Pier, sort of inner city, right beside the river. And we've had Howard Smith Wharves in recent times as well. That's probably about 5 years ago now, but that's a really amazing precinct on the edge of the river, overlooking the Story Bridge in the city, bars and restaurants and etc. So I think Brisbane's just really evolving with all this new development, and really coming of age, has been for a while now. And I think, it's really just lifted in terms of its appeal and entertainment and what it's got to offer. And and creating a lot of jobs as well, of course, all the new development.
It does. It feels like a different city from maybe 10 or 20 years ago. Certainly a lot more cosmopolitan, a lot more high-rise now. I think Brisbane, when I first went there, it used to be quite a relatively low-rise city, a bit more like Adelaide is these days. But Brisbane's really embraced that kind of Asian century idea, and it feels, you can go out, as you said, down the wharves there at Howard Smith Wharves, or you can go out in the city, and there's actually a bit going on. It's definitely sort of coming on, and that investment will be good, I think, for the city. Guy, this kind of ties into the third story here. So there's a piece in the conversation about, so the headline was, the housing crisis hit Queensland hard, jolted into action, the state has raised its game. So I think the reason this sort of ties in, I guess, you mentioned there's a hell of a lot of infrastructure projects going. Now, you mentioned some of the big ones in Brisbane, but also if you travel around the state, you can't drive anywhere without getting caught in roadworks on weekends and picking up demerits along the way. So, there's just an awful lot of competition for construction workers and trades. I think there's a lot of FIFO. There's mining, construction and engineering going on. And housing seems to be pretty low down on the list. And I guess this is one of the reasons that's led to the supply shortage right across. It's not just Brisbane, it's all over southeast Queensland. There's just nowhere near enough housing being built at the moment. So the conversation pointed out, since COVID hit in 2020, Queensland's population has grown by 6.6%, compared with 4.7% for Australia as a whole. So Australia's been having record population growth over the past year or two, but Queensland is actually picking up people from interstate as well, especially southeast Queensland, and there's just no way the housing construction seems to keep pace. Now, I think putting the stats to one side, one of the interesting things to me is that I've spent a bit of time traveling the last few weeks, and Perth, it was really noticeable that there's houses being built in sort of some of the outer suburbs, but there's no units going up, just nothing really happening. Gold Coast, yes, there's quite a lot of construction projects, medium density apartments going up at the Gold Coast, but Brisbane, much like Perth, really, it doesn't seem to me that much is getting up at the moment. What do you think?
No. I read the Charter Keck Kramer report on the apartment market just recently, and their evaluation and advisory firm, and it said that they believe that the supply is going to be, or it's going to be chronically undersupplied, the unit market in Brisbane, for the next 2 to 3 years, and probably look like it might take some time after that, even just to catch up with demand. So, there's definitely, I think most of the construction is the infrastructure projects happening at the moment, not a lot of apartments. So, and if there is apartments being built, it's generally the higher end stuff, because that's, I think the developers can make money on those projects rather than the more everyday size 2-bed, 2-bath units that we used to see. Really not a lot happening at the moment, unfortunately, in terms of new supply. But
yeah. Well, I think that you touched on the key point there. It was really obvious to me when I was at the Gold Coast. You can, or even if you go to somewhere like Redcliffe, you can see the stuff that's getting approved. It's stuff with ocean views where the penthouse might sell for somewhere in the millions, but the actual sort of everyday suburban units just not being built. And I think let's look at some more stats from the conversation. Across the state of Queensland, new tenancy rents are up by 45% over the past 4 years. Even adjusting for inflation, that's a 23% increase in real terms. But I think it's one thing to sort of talk about high-end markets, but this is really squeezing the bottom end of the market. I think Australia, we've largely seen governments ignoring social housing quite a lot in recent years. Most of the market is really being supplied by the private sector. And the stats show that less than 1% of available Queensland rentals in March 2024 were affordable to a single person earning minimum wage. And I dare say, actually, it's not a pleasant sight at the moment. The rental market in Queensland are just it's really striking when you go into the city. And there's tent cities popping up in various parts of Brisbane, down by the river there. So there's a real issue here. Now, I'm not really one to be too praising of state governments, generally speaking, but to their credit, the Queensland government has been stepping in here, and they're setting some targets for social housing over the rest of the decade. They've done some fairly creative stuff in terms of repurposing obsolete stock or hotel rooms that aren't being used. So, and yes, there's an election coming up, and a skeptic might say, well, that's a part of it. But I think it's really, it's been good to see the state government actually springing into action here, because I think historically been a bit complacent, bit sort of, a lot of policy inaction as it comes to the lower end of the market. So, yeah, I think, as you said, it seems that the sort of premium end of the market, developers can make projects stack up, but at the bottom end of the market, that's really where people are being impacted, and it's good to see the government stepping in a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it needs to be prioritised for sure. I think it's just, we're seeing a lot of tent cities and parks around the inner city, and it's, in a country like Australia, you'd think we could do better than that. So absolutely, yeah, good to see on that front. I think it definitely needs to be a priority.
I think I saw an RBA graph on this, and it kind of looked at the sort of income quintiles in Australia. And if you look, people in the top 4 income quintiles, they basically spend the same amount of their income on rent as they did 40 years ago. It hasn't really changed a lot, but it's right at the bottom of the market where people are now spending much more of their income on rents. And I think there must be various drivers of that, but I think in particular, just the government has really backed away over quite a long period of time now from actually developing public housing, social housing. And it's that affordable end of the market that's really got clobbered. So, yeah, hopefully some more of the same from the Queensland government, because that's really an area which, well, it's not good enough, as you said, for a country like Australia with record household wealth, and we've got high population growth. So we need to do better, particularly at that bottom end of the market. So, so what are you seeing for the rest of the year in Brisbane? I'll put you on the spot. What do you think? I guess at the moment, it doesn't seem to be much of a slowdown in people moving to the city, and the economy seems to be generally holding up okay. What are you expecting to see over the remainder of 2024?
Yeah, well, we certainly don't see the unit and townhouse market slowing down anytime soon, with the super low supply levels that we just spoke about. So we expect that to continue to be really strong for some time yet. Houses, obviously, it looks as though interest rates might stay higher for a bit longer. So yeah, I think the slightly high price brackets might slow a little bit in terms of houses, but it's still very little on the market. So as long as the supply levels are really low, I think there's going to be continued strong growth. Maybe it might moderate a little bit, the rate of growth, but yeah, no one's quite got the crystal ball, but it's looking pretty good, and with the lack of choice we've still got here, and demand still seems very strong, so that bodes well for continued growth. Yeah.
It does, yeah. It seems to me that with the medium density projects, it takes quite a long time for that supply to come. I think you can build a house fairly quickly, but to get planning approval for a unit project and then get it actually brought to market, that could be a 2 to 3 year process. So that in itself suggests, provided we don't get kind of a black swan event with inflation and interest rates going higher, I would suspect that means that you're not going to see a supply response for a couple of years at least. So yeah, I mean, there's not going to be too much change there. Hey, Guy, final question before I let you go. This is a question people ask me all the time, so I'm going to flick past it on to you. Let's say you're an investor looking to buy somewhere in Brisbane, and you've got a budget of, let's say, 900K. Which kind of suburbs are you looking at? If you're going to buy a house, are there any sort of suburbs where you're seeing value? I've seen some good deals in places like Zilmere recently, but any favourites of yours?
Yeah, I like probably with that sort of budget, we've generally bought quite a bit around Bracken Ridge, but I do like Bayside suburbs as well. Some areas like Capalaba, Alexandra Hills, on the south side as well, Shayla Park. You can still get some really big blocks of land in areas like that, which at the moment you can't subdivide, but I think at some stage in the future there may well be potential to subdivide some of those 1,000 square metre plus blocks, which you can still sometimes get within that sort of budget. I probably buy a little bit more on the south side than I do on the north side than I do on the south. But Bald Hills, Bracken Ridge, we've always liked. But for that budget, I'd probably consider some better townhouses and a little bit closer to the CBD as well, because I think they'll continue to perform really well. Because I think a lot of people still want to live close to the action, and are not so worried about having a big yard. So villas as well. Villas, I think, will continue to be really strong for some time. I think with all the baby boomers downsizing and wanting single level, and there's just a really limited supply of that type of property. So
I think this has been the step change in the market, hasn't it, Guy? I think if you went back to 2019, a much lower budget could get you a house in maybe in the inner 10K ring with a reasonable rental return. But now that's quite hard. And I think that's pushing some more investors to look at more modern options, better rental returns, and possibly that's kind of 3-bedroom townhouse type stock instead of houses where with interest rates where they are, it's quite difficult to make them stack up for a lot of investors. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. So well, thanks for your suburb picks there and special insights from Brisbane. So what do you got on for the rest of the week? I assume you're flat out going to open homes and trying to source some off-market deals, eh?
Waiting to hear on one offer as we speak, actually. The nervous wait, which has been dragging on for the last day. So, but yeah, lining up a few potentials for the weekend, doing a bit of running, just ran the Brisbane half marathon on the weekend as well. No, much of the same. Just a lot of speaking to agents and inspections and etc. Yeah.
Pretty good. Yeah, it's a nice cooler time of year in Brisbane. Actually, just on the Brisbane theme, next week Chris is still away, so we'll have Cameron Cusher from the REA Group, always a popular guest. So Guy, thanks so much for your special insights today, and look forward to chatting again soon over a pizza.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.